Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 23.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards. Welcome to the show. On today's episode, I bring back my friend and colleague, Dr. Horatio Jug, and we dig in to a topic that's been covered over and over again on lots of different podcasts, not necessarily ours, from the stage over and over, and a lot of the same recycled material. So we wanted to tackle this from a different perspective today, and the conversation is around certainty. Obviously, certainty is vitally important to the success of any business, of any practice. But one of the areas that gets missed a lot is clinical certainty. How do you develop clinical certainty to know that what you're doing is leading to the results that you're attempting to accomplish, or heck, that you even know what those results are? If you don't get just enough out of that part of the conversation, you're going to love the intro where we talk about, what you're trying to do right now, what you've been told to try and do to build certainty. And some of these are the long-standing really sacred cows in the chiropractic profession that maybe you've attempted, but they're not leading to the successes that you'd love to have. So definitely enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.
Horatio, welcome back to Life by Design for Chiropractors. How are you today?
I'm good, and as always, it's a pleasure to be on the show. I love doing this.
Yeah, we've got a great rotation going between you and Mike, and
All the other awesome guests.
Yeah, we've got amazing guests. Yeah, actually, we had Fletch there a couple episodes ago, and having Dan Sullivan on the show and John Minardi, and then the combination of the three of us jumping in. So it has been really enjoyable to do the Life by Design for Chiropractors podcast. I know it's something we thought about doing for a long, long time, and you had a lot of different things on the go. I was also doing the podcast with Lawrence and the My Practice Rules. So just it's all coming together at the right time. And we kind of went back, Horatio, to the first episode. And if you haven't listened to the first episode, what is real chiropractic? I think it's worth going back and checking that out. We were talking about that today in the pre-show, and just, the tone of that show, and really putting a stake in the ground or a flag in the ground for Life by Design to say, this is what we stand for. This is what we believe chiropractic to be, what it can be, and how to practice in this model. And I know not that we've gone away from that, but we've put so much emphasis recently on marketing, which is, clearly extremely important in terms of a topic, and something we're all very passionate about at Life by Design is marketing like it's actually the year you live in and not 1991 in terms of your marketing systems and strategies. So I think we've had a lot of fun doing that, but we wanted to spin things back around. And, some of the questions we get at Life by Design for Chiropractors, really they prompt different episodes, and whether it's a coaching question or someone who pops in on the Facebook page or through the website. And, one of the things that has been, I think, prevalent in my mind, Horatio, and I know in your mind, you were actually working, it's in the background now on a product, the Certainty Creator, and just certainty in general is such an important component. But I think, and this is what today's episode is going to be about, is I think what most docs believe will generate more certainty for them is a massive trapdoor. And it doesn't work because they're actually false and they're myths. And I think that you're really missing the boat. We're going to tell you today in a bit what the three things are that you would need to have in place in order to develop certainty. And then we'll put a very specific focus on one of those components as we go through. But, Horatio, I think that certainty is one of those key components in that there's people in the profession who say absolutely insane things, but they say them with so much certainty that it allows their practice to function in a way that, at least is sustainable, and in many cases, oddly successful. What do you think about that? Why can you be successful and do things totally wrong, but if your certainty is in place, things seem to work out in the positive?
So that's a really interesting question. Why do I think that? I was interviewing somebody today, and it seems like it's a very used quote on the internet, but I'm not gonna say it right. I'm gonna bastardize it. But I when most people think about certainty, they think about this quote. I think they think, fanatics are certain, whereas smart people are always skeptical. So there seems to be just a general trend in our culture to to have this idea of knowledge like it's impossible, that we can never be truly certain, and only crazy people are really, really certain. And I think that translates really, really well over into chiropractic, because, when we hear some of these people who speak who are certain, they're really over the top, they're really loud, they're really boisterous, and for them it's a type of certainty. But I think for the rest of us, we can kind of see through that, and we're like, well, if that's certainty, then that's not what I want to be. But yet when we talk about certainty, we talk about a cool, calm, collected, for lack of a better terminology, something that comes from deep inside of you, that you are certain that this is what you know, and this is how you're going to explain it to somebody else. And now, just to add to that, the best example that I've heard about this is, most people think, and this is what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about, most people think, and the way they try to develop their certainty is, they jump to all these conclusions and they do all these things in the short term to try to boost their certainty. I remember Dan Kennedy talking about certainty and confidence like it's an elastic band. So if you were to put an elastic band between your thumb and your pinky finger, and you were trying to stretch that tight, right, in order to stretch your certainty, you could do it for a little bit. But then as soon as you took your mind off of stretching the elastic band and you get on with your life, you spoke to your wife, you hung out with your kids, what your confidence would do is it would snap back to its form. And I think if you go about creating confidence and certainty the wrong way, you experience that snapback where you have confidence for a little bit, and then as things go on, it kind of erodes and you go back to where you were before, right? Whereas what we're going to be talking about today is how to actually build this stuff and have it be a part of who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think great points, Horatio. And, speaking from experience, growing up in the profession, as a young doctor, and you see people that you look up to and you go to different seminars and you hear them speak and they seem so certain. And in that certainty, you think, I need to be like that. And you try to mimic them and you try to model them. And, when you start to get into it deeper and deeper and maybe get to know some of these people and you see behind the scenes and behind the veil, it's amazing how often what is talked about from the stage or the platform is not what's getting done, day to day in that person's practice or in that person's life. And, that idea of developing certainty by mimicking these people that we look up to because we hear their stories, we take them at face value, I think that leads down a very, very, not just slippery slope, but it can lead to a really dark place. I know for myself, in the profession, following Reggie Gold and all these other people. And, obviously I learned immensely from many people in the profession and stood on the shoulders of some great people. But at the same time, I went down some challenging places because I looked to people and I thought that they had it all figured out. And that's my own fault for, not going deeper and really understanding, the whole concept. But, it really leads to a very difficult place, and it leads to trying to figure out how to become certain. And you end up doing a bunch of things that I think all of us in the profession, well, I shouldn't say all, but most people in the profession have tried at one point or another. So because we talk about these different myths in terms of how to develop certainty, you'll probably have a bit of a chuckle, but at the same time, there's some seriousness to it. And there's no question that there's a lack of certainty. I mean, whether it's anecdotally in the coaching or consulting that we do, or the fact that there's 5% of people who, see a chiropractor once a year, whatever all those numbers are, the reality is at the core of it, there has to be a certainty issue. Because if we had certainty and the vast majority of the profession had certainty, you'd see a much higher utilization rate. Because, if you're certain and you're sold on yourself and you're sold on your product, then that's going to translate and you're going to sell more and you're going to sell more and you're going to sell more. And then if, all the profession was doing that, we'd see much, much greater impact in terms of utilization, successful chiropractors, and so on. So let's talk about some of these myths, Horatio, because I think there's some funny ones in here, but they're all real in the sense that so many of us have gone to this place where we think, here's the next answer, here's the solution, here's what I need to do to develop my certainty. I know I have pretty much done every single one of these, and I'm pretty sure you've done every single one of them as well. So why don't we jump in? We have I think 7 myths here, Horatio.
Wow.
I know. So there's 7 myths here, and really, I think that it's so funny because not only have we done them all, but there's people listening right now who are doing some of these. So don't beat yourself up, but definitely do a reality check and look in the mirror and ask yourself, okay, is that the best way to develop certainty? So number one is, hey, got to read the green books, Creatio.
Got to read the green books.
Did you get your greens today?
Yeah, and again,
sorry, I can't even. I can't do it.
I'm just laughing because you're laughing. I think here's what I can't stop either. Here's what we're not saying. We're not saying that reading is a bad idea when it comes to increasing your certainty, and we're not saying that the green books have no value. But you have to understand what it is that you're reading. You're reading experiences.
Blasphemy, Creatio. That's blasphemy.
That's okay. I'm a heretic when it comes to this stuff. I think if we need anything less, if we just had less dogma in the profession of chiropractic, I think we would. We'd have more certainty. Yes. So here's the problem. Here's the problem with BJ Palmer. BJ Palmer is a rationalist. And again, guys, please understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying he wasn't great. I'm not saying he doesn't have great aspects. I'm not saying we shouldn't study him. But what I'm saying is you have to be able to differentiate the good ideas from the bad ideas. And the dogma comes in from, accepting anything that BJ wrote just because BJ wrote it or just because DD wrote it. So what I mean by rationalism is BJ would come up with an idea that was, totally devoid of any reality. Let me give you an example. Subluxation only happens at C1 and C2. Where did he come up with this? Where did this information come from? How did he come to this conclusion? He'll never tell you because he can't tell you. It doesn't come from any reasons. And then he built these huge constructs and these huge sayings and these huge books based on this idea that we don't even know if it's true or not. So that's a big problem, right? Every time you study or you read something, you always want to make sure that you're tying it back to reality, not just on what somebody said because they said so. That's the danger with the green books.
Yes. So when you're trying to develop your certainty, I'm not saying don't read the green books, but as with any book or anything you read or anything you listen to, including anything I would ever say.
Exactly.
Yeah, you need to filter it through and think about it and determine, is this something that's based in reality? Is there truth to this? Or is this something that is just completely baseless and untrue, in which case it's not going to develop your certainty, at least not in a core, deeper sense, maybe a false certainty for a period of time until until the floor falls out of your incorrect principle. And, to take this to the next step, and number two is really along the same lines because it's, part and parcel with the green books, and that's listen to your innate. I mean, there's a statement
I actually think this one should have been number one, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, these aren't in order of importance, but, probably the worst statement in the history of the profession in terms of how to create a practice, develop a practice, build your practice, run your business. I'm not saying that, we're not disputing, this is another podcast because we are actually disputing innate intelligence and some of those concepts, but that's not for this podcast. No. What we're disputing is, the use of, listening to some mythical force in terms of how you should run your practice, Creatio.
Or your life, I mean, for that matter. I've heard of some practitioners that make, checkups and corrections based on, what their innate intelligence is telling them, not even based on any type of scientific or analytical results. Inside of you're not programmed to be a business person. You're not programmed automatically to be a doctor. You're not programmed automatically to be a marketer. You actually have to learn these things. They all require time. They all require knowledge. And most importantly, they require you to use, to borrow a chiropractic term, the only brain that you have, which is the educated brain.
Yeah, it's not as if growing, running, and developing your practice is, as simple as falling asleep. Right? Or
right.
using, or, excreting, toxins or, whatever the other innate processes are of the body. It's not a physiological normal that just gets expressed, right? It's something you have to learn. Yes.
That's right.
So to think about, I'm gonna develop my certainty by listening to my innate. I need to get more certain. I need to listen to my innate. Again, it gets repeated over and over again, and I'm almost speechless when that's somebody's rationale as to how they've decided to run their practice. And, in some cases, so there's some great practices that are big practices that would say, well, I listen to my innate. And interestingly, when you actually break down that person's practice, it wasn't that they listened to their innate, although they may have convinced themselves of that. It's that they made a lot of really good decisions.
Yeah, they hired a lot of really good people. They have a lot of good systems. They're a good communicator. And again, none of which you're born with, all of which you develop as a learned skill.
So a couple other myths here, Horatio, that maybe are a little less controversial, adding something more, right? So for example, we talked about this on a previous episode. In fact, I think it was the last episode. If you go back and listen to that, we talked about, how running a wellness practice could devastate your business if you do it wrong. And one of the things that people do is, especially now with chiropractors becoming less and less certain about chiropractic, one of the things we see a lot of younger chiropractors do, or even, I guess any chiropractor at this point, they'll add something in that they're more certain about. And they think that will increase their chiropractic certainty. So if they're certain about nutrition, they'll add in nutrition. If they're certain about exercise, they'll add in exercise. That's not going to increase your certainty. Maybe they'll go to a seminar, right? This is a huge one, obviously, and there's lots of, seminars and events, and we run a seminar and event. We really focus it around training, and it's definitely not a get pumped, get spizzed type seminar. If you've spent any time
there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, actually, it's not true. There is something wrong with it. If that's what's getting you to develop certainty in its false,
yes.
That's what's wrong with it.
I mean, a seminar as such, like to get everyone excited about chiropractic, I don't think there's anything wrong with that type of seminar.
No. I mean, the seminar itself, there's nothing wrong with it if you can find value in that. The challenge is going to be if you expect that to develop your certainty, it's not going to work.
Right.
In some instances, Horatio, what happens is you'll turn and you'll start actually bashing medicine, right? And so you feel like you're making your product and your certainty around your product and service, more certain because you're bashing another product. So, medicine doesn't work. Medicine kills people. Drugs kill people. So somehow that by default must make my product better and be more certain about my product.
Yeah, I call that the Croatian mentality, the spitefulness, right? I don't care how crappy my life is. As long as your life is crappier, then I'm okay.
Now that's certainty right there.
Yes, I'm certain that my life sucks.
A big one would be changing techniques.
Yes.
Right? So we see this all the time. We were talking about Gonstead and the principle, right? Don't question the principle, question the application. Or the technique. But you should question the principle, right?
Yeah.
Don't question the principle once you know the principle's true. But if the principle's not true, then just changing your technique isn't going to make what you're doing any better, and it's not going to make you any more certain. So, maybe you look at somebody else who has a successful practice and you go, you know what? They're upper cervical. It must be upper cervical.
Yes.
But you could see somebody who does Logan Basic and they have a successful practice. You could see somebody who does full spine or Thompson or torque release or whatever the technique is, and they all have successful practices. And you see same people who have all the same techniques who have horrible practices that are just deathly unsuccessful and they're not certain. So it's not a technique problem. Again, as much as it is another couple of issues that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. And the final myth and the final way that a lot of people attempt to increase certainty is, just, hey, you know what? Got to tell the story. Just need to tell the story a little bit more. I got to stop making this so complicated. I got to get out of my head, got to get into my heart, and I just need to start telling the story.
Yep, you've that one kind of goes back a little bit. I'm glad we included that one specifically because that's really good one that a lot of chiropractors will relate to, including myself in the past. Kind of goes back to the innate one. Just follow your innate. Well, you just got to tell the story, and droves of people are going to come to your practice. Well,
sure, that's it.
Yeah, yes, it's definitely helpful to increase your certainty if you know what chiropractic can do. But in certain, just telling the story would be a lot better if you knew how to market it to the right people.
That's right. You have to tell people what you do and how it can help them. But to tell people that, the power that made the body heals the body and, I move the bone and God does the healing and, whatever those conversations are, telling that story, isn't going to build a practice that is, sustainable, built on a modern contemporary model. And again, some of these practices that have a lot of people in them, where that's the model, understand that when you peel back the layers, collecting $14 a visit or $10 a visit and seeing 1,000 people doesn't equal a successful practice just because you're seeing 1,000 people a week, right? You put a box on the wall and let people put in whatever they want, and you tell them that, the power that made the body heals the body, and I move the bone, God does the healing. People will come into your practice. But what type of practice will you have if you actually charge people what your care is worth? Given that type of certainty and that type of communication, I don't think it's going to be the practice that you would really like to have, especially if you're in a non-insurance dependent situation, which is a whole other conversation. There's so much that gets skewed when people who are looking to grow a practice, develop a practice, and then you listen to people speak, they're up on the stage. It's very difficult to know, Krisha, what's true and what's not true, right? I see 1,000 people a week. Okay, well, great. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. How much do you charge them? How many of them are paying? How many of them are paying and not having insurance pay for those visits?
So what's your overhead? What does the rest of your life look like?
How many new people do you need to maintain that? What's your retention? All this kind of stuff. So you have to be very, very careful when you listen to this being explained, because it can put you in a situation where you lose certainty. Like, man, I'm telling the story. Why are people not coming to see me? Why are they not staying? And you end up in this kind of cyclic negative down spiral, which we see so many people go through, which I've been through, which you've been through.
Yeah, me too. Oh, of course.
So how do we fix it? Let's talk about that. So the way we develop certainty, there's 3 components to this, and we're going to spend time on this third one and break it down. The other 2 we'll come back to on a future episode. But number 1 is self-esteem, is confidence. Talk a bit about that, Krisha, and why that's at the core of developing real certainty.
Yeah, so self-esteem by definition is being at peace with yourself. If I had to explain it to you in an example, the best way is to look at a dog that is playing, catch or fetch or whatever, and it's just running, and the dog just loves being a dog. It doesn't know any better. It knows what it knows, and it's happy with that knowledge. And if I had to paint a picture of self-esteem, I think that would be a really great picture. And yet when we look at ourselves, when we look at self-esteem, Jamie, you touched on so many aspects that are important in chiropractic that are really ruining chiropractors' lives in practice. Well, I'm not seeing 1,000. Well, I don't see this many new people. Well, my practice doesn't look like that. Well, I don't have this car and I don't have this home, and none of that stuff matters. You need to know what you want, and you need to be happy, along the path to what you want. And if you have genuinely high self-esteem, you're really happy with yourself and living in your own skin, that is going to completely transform the way that you communicate, not only with the people that are coming into your practice, but the people outside of your practice who could potentially be coming in one day. It also changes the way you communicate with your staff, the way you communicate online, the way you react to when somebody drops out of your practice, the way you react to a medical doctor who might not like your practice. It really just changes. It's like the underlying soil from which everything else is going to grow from.
And in terms of developing that, we usually point people to 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. There's some great concepts in there, and he develops a great framework, ratio, for building self-esteem. So if you haven't read that book, I'll put it in the show notes and a link to that, and you can go grab it. The second component is philosophy. Talk a bit about philosophy, because I know that, our spin on philosophy, we're not talking about chiropractic philosophy, because that's going back to the problems we already discussed. Hey, just tell the story, listen to your innate, did you get your greens? Sorry. Did you get your greens today? I can't do it. Sorry. Okay. So talk about philosophy and what you're actually talking about.
Right. So when we talk about philosophy, we're talking about a proper philosophy, and I have to give, he's not the one that invented this concept, but I have to give credit to Dr. Gentempo. He talked about the 5 branches of philosophy, so metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, and aesthetics. Having a proper philosophy, especially when it comes to the type of work that you're going to do, you definitely have to be able to, go deep, way back into the nature of things, right? The metaphysical, not the weird metaphysical part, but the nature of things, which is what metaphysics stands for. You have to really understand what it is that you're trying to do, what it is that you can do, right? And I know this is going to kind of lead into the third one, which is perfect, but knowing how, once you know what you can do, you have to know how you can do it.
Yeah. So once you get that, then you have to know how to apply it in a sense where, let's apply it to chiropractic and chiropractic certainty. How do you then deliver that? And that's what we really want to talk about in the final part of today's show, and really piece that together, because, you're talking about having self-esteem and confidence, and then you talked about philosophy, true philosophy in the 5 branches, and in this sense, the nature of physiology and understanding that. And then as a chiropractor, really, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about is the, not chiropractic philosophy, but the philosophy of chiropractic.
Right. That's right. Because it's an art, right? Because it involves decision making, right? You have to know, you need to have a set of principles on which to know what decisions you can make and how to make those decisions.
Right. And so we're talking about a professional philosophy and what to do and how to develop that. So all of these tie in together. So as your self-esteem grows, you're working on, say, the 6 pillars, your confidence is increasing. And then you apply that, in a certain way in your practice where you say, give a recommendation and the people follow through and they get a great result. And then, you build more confidence and then your self-esteem goes up. So all these things tie in together and they're all part of the same thing. But from a clinical perspective, there's 2 pieces. You need to know what you're delivering, and you need to know how to communicate it. Right? Yep. Those are the 2 big pieces. So we're not going to talk about how to communicate it today. There's lots of that, on the different podcasts, and we'll come back to that on a regular basis as we always do. But I want to talk a little bit about the clinical certainty component here, Horatio, and knowing what you deliver. And I think this is the point that we wanted to get to, is that this is a place that goes untapped in terms of developing your certainty. People don't think about this. There's so much, as you were talking about earlier, there's so much, rationalism that's involved in technique and understanding what we deliver. We won't get into that today, but you need to really get into this and understand, what is it you're trying to do? What are your objectives? How do you attain those objectives, apply them, and make sure it's done in a reliable and a valid way, in a repeatable, over and over and over again type situation where you can know that what's happening is what you say is happening. And that's a huge way and a huge component to develop confidence and certainty.
Let me just stop you right there, because you're absolutely right. And to be perfectly honest, there's really no excuse for not knowing this stuff. I mean, we're at a point now where we're doing enough research on the spine and the nerve system. And we have John Minardi that's organizing research. We have James Chestnut that's organizing research. We have Heidi Havoc. We have Dan Sullivan. We've had these people on the actual podcast who have done an incredible job of organizing research, putting it together in a way that's understandable and applicable for the chiropractor. So there's no way that you shouldn't know at this point in 2016, when we're recording this podcast, what you can actually deliver to the human body.
So, yes, I agree with you 100%. And so here's a framework that you can use. And what I want you to do is to go through this process for yourself. Think about how you're caring for people, what you're delivering, why you're delivering it, and what you're measuring. And I'll give you a few steps here. So number 1, you need to have a gold standard in terms of what it is that you're trying to measure, right? And what it is that you're moving towards. So, Life by Design, outside the spine, we talk about, the gold standard of, let's say, for instance, strength training, mobility, and conditioning, right? That's the gold standard to meet the movement requirements of the body. We know that through science and research, and we know that that's based in reality. The same is true in chiropractic. We need to know what the gold standard is in terms of brain, spine, and nervous system function. So what's the gold standard in terms of, the anatomy of the spine? What is the gold standard in terms of the function of the nervous system? What's it supposed to be doing, right?
Right.
We talked, Horatio, you've talked a lot about the nature of things. What's the nature of the spine and nervous system when it's working the way it's supposed to? So you need to know what that is. And then the next piece of the puzzle is you need to know how to measure deviation from that standard, right? And it needs to be done in a way that's valid and a way that's reliable. And this is where your different testing comes in. Whether it's X-rays or thermography or EMG, can you measure deviations away from this gold standard? Then you need to have a valid criteria to move people towards the standard, right? So, how do you know how many visits it's going to take to go from point A to point B? And I'm not saying down to the visit number, right? But you need to move away from, okay, well, everybody who walks through my door is going to get 84 visits.
Yep.
And a 12-month program.
Right.
I don't care if they're a baby or they're 100 years old. That's crazy, right? And that's going to eat away at your certainty because it's not going to play out in terms of delivering optimal results. You need to have a valid criteria. So, is this going to take 12 to 24 visits to go from here to here? Is it going to take 24 to 36 or 36 to 40? What's it going to take? And part of that comes from the reality of clinical experience. Part of it can be pulled from the science of, movement neurology and physiology, but you need to know what that is. And then the final piece here, Horatio, is in your technique or your force delivery, you need to have some type of pre and post check. And then you need to have a way to know that that technique or that approach is moving you towards that outcome in terms of moving somebody towards that gold standard. So let me just recap those. You need to have a gold standard. What's it supposed to be like? You need to be able to measure the deviation away from the gold standard in a way that's reliable and valid. You need to have some criteria of what it will take to move people from point A to point B. And then you need to know with your technique, what does it look like before? What does it look like after with my test? And know that that particular approach is going to elicit the changes towards that gold standard. If you can have those things in place, talk about confidence, right? Talk about certainty. You literally just say to people, here's your tests. Here's what they look like. This is what they tell me. Here's where you want to go, right? Yes. Here's what it's going to take. And then you deliver the force, pre-check, post-check, and then you retest at whatever set period of time, and you let them know you made it to this point. We are successful. Here's what the next stage or the next step is going to look like. If you can cyclically repeat that over and over, your clinical certainty should be through the roof. And it's not technique-based per se, right? You should definitely look at your technique, but different techniques, different people have delivered them and with all had, incredible success across lots of different techniques. So I think the unifying principle there is that there's some type of force delivery to the spine in some way that elicits some type of neurological and structural change towards a gold standard. So knowing what those things are is at the core of certainty.
Yeah, I can't say anything more to that. That was really good.
Okay, wonderful. So guys, here's what we talked about today. If you want to develop certainty, there's a lot of different things that have to happen, and there's a lot of things that you need to stop doing. Stop, trying to listen to your innate or bashing medicine, and start building your self-esteem and your confidence. Understand real philosophy. Understand the nature of the physiology of which we're working with, and then clinically know what you're trying to accomplish, be able to measure it in a valid, reliable way, deliver a process that moves people towards it, and then have a technique that is repeatable, that moves people and can deliver the result that you say you're delivering. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to check out your process, see if you're hitting all these steps. If you're doing any of the other steps that we talked about at the beginning that are a myth, then I want you to get rid of those things and stop doing them. And I want you to start doing the things that are actually going to build your certainty. Because if you can do that, it's at the core of taking all the other things, systems, communication, and it's, as Horatio said so well earlier, it is the soil upon which all of these other things will grow from. So go to the show notes, Life by Design for Chiropractors.com/podcast. Check out today's episode. Find it in there. We'll put everything in there. If you haven't checked out LifeCon, please check it out, bestlifeconever.com. We hope to see you there in September. It's going to be a great, great training event. And I know, happy to say, almost filling up, Horatio. So I'm pretty confident we're going to sell that guy out, which we're really excited about. So please, if you've thought about it, you want to be there, you haven't taken that step and registered, best LifeCon ever, go and do that. And thank you for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.